My name is Frank. I'm 69 years old, and I've finally reached the age where people stop asking what you do for a living. They just ask if you're still driving. That's how you know you're getting older. When you're 25, people ask, "What do you do?" When you're 40, "How's work?" When you're 55, "When are you going to retire?" When you're 69, "Can you still see at night?" That's not a career question, that's a road safety investigation. I retired because I thought I'd earned it. 46 years of working. 46. At some point, I figured the government, my employer, my wife, somebody had to say, "Frank, you've done enough." Nobody said that. I had to announce it myself. I told my boss, "I'm retiring." He said, "Congratulations." My wife said, "Great." My bank said, "Are you sure?" My doctor said, "You should stay active." And my body said, "Finally." I had a plan. It was beautiful. I would wake up without an alarm, drink coffee, read the newspaper, go for walks, work on a few projects, take some trips, spend more time with my wife. Maybe play golf, maybe fish, maybe sit outside and do absolutely nothing. I had spent my entire life waiting for that. The first morning of retirement, I woke up at 5:47. No alarm. My eyes just opened. I looked at the clock. I thought, why am I awake? My body said, "We have responsibilities." I said, "No, we don't." My body said, "We don't know how to do this." I got out of bed. My wife was already awake. She looked at me. "Why are you up?" "I don't know." "Can't you sleep?" I thought retirement meant I could. She said, "You can." I said, "Then why am I awake?" She said, "That's not my department." That's marriage. After 40 years, you stop solving problems together. You just identify which department is responsible. I went downstairs, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. I felt free. No boss, no meetings, no deadlines, no emails, no traffic, no commute. Nothing. Then my wife walked into the kitchen holding a notebook. She said, "Good morning." I said, "Good morning." She smiled. Then she said, "Since you're retired..." I knew. I knew immediately. There are 3 words that can destroy a man's retirement. Since you're retired. She put the notebook on the table. I said, "What is that?" "Nothing." I looked at it. It was thick. I said, "That doesn't look like nothing." She said, "It's just a few things around the house." I opened it. There were pages. Pages. Not a list. A government program. I said, "What are all these?" "Things we've been putting off." I said, "Who is we?" She said, "You're home now." I said, "That didn't answer my question." She pointed. "Garage." "Okay." "Basement." "Okay." "Guest room." "Okay." "Fence." "Okay." "Closet." "Okay." "Attic." "Okay." "Kitchen cabinets." "Okay." "Back porch." "Okay." I stopped. "What's this?" "Organize the shed." I said, "We have a shed?" She looked at me. "Exactly." I didn't know whether to laugh or call my old boss and ask for my job back. I said, "I thought retirement meant I wouldn't have to work." She said, "You don't have to." I said, "Then what is this?" She smiled. "Projects." That's the difference between men and women. A man looks at a broken fence and thinks, "That fence is broken." A woman looks at a broken fence and thinks, "That could be a project." Then she looks at the garage. Project. Basement. Project. Kitchen. Project. Your entire life becomes a project. My wife says, "You'll enjoy having things to do." I said, I have things to do. What? Nothing. She laughed. I wasn't joking. Nothing is a legitimate retirement activity. People spend their entire working lives dreaming about doing nothing. Then they retire and feel guilty for doing it. I sat outside. My wife came out. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." She said, "For how long?" I said, 20 minutes. She said, "You've been sitting there for 20 minutes?" Yes. She said, "Doing nothing?" Yes. She said, "Don't you feel lazy?" I said, "No." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I used to get paid to sit in meetings that accomplished nothing." She laughed. That was my first retirement victory. Then she said, "After you're done doing nothing, can you clean the garage?" And that's when I discovered the real meaning of retirement. You don't retire from work. You retire from getting paid for it. I thought retirement would bring my wife and me closer, and technically it did. We're closer now. She can see me from every room in the house. That's the problem. When I was working, there was a beautiful boundary. I left the house at 7:30. I went to work. She went about her day. We came back together. We had stories. How was your day? Busy. Mine too. Then dinner, television, bed. Now I'm home all day. She knows everything. Everything. I can't even have a snack privately. I open the refrigerator. She says, "What are you eating?" I say, "Nothing." She says, "I heard the refrigerator." I say, "How can you hear a refrigerator?" She says, "I know what you sound like when you're getting food." 41 years of marriage gives a woman investigative powers. I can't even open a cabinet without an interrogation. "What are you looking for?" "Something." "What?" "I don't know." "Why are you opening that cabinet?" "Because I thought it might be in there." "What?" "I don't know." "Frank." "What?" "Close the cabinet." I close it. Then I remember what I was looking for. I open it again. She says, "Frank!" I say, "I remembered." She says, "What?" "I don't know." I forgot again. That's aging. Your brain doesn't lose information. It just moves it without telling you. I can remember something that happened in 1978 perfectly, but I can't remember why I walked into the kitchen. I walked in with purpose. Purpose. Then I stand there. I look around. I think, why am I here? I walk back to the living room. I sit down. Then I remember. The remote! I get up, walk back, forget again. My wife says, "What are you doing?" I say, "Nothing." She says, "You just went into the kitchen." I know. "Why?" "I don't know." She says, "You're getting old." I say, "No." She says, "What do you call it?" I call it multitasking. I walk back to the living room. She says, "Did you find the remote?" I say, "No." She points. It's in my hand. That's when I realized retirement had made me the kind of man I used to laugh at. I used to see older men looking for their glasses. Now I'm the older man looking for my glasses. The worst part? They're usually on my head. My wife says, "Frank, they're right there." I say, "I know." "You didn't know. I was testing you." She says, "Testing me for what?" "Awareness." She says, "Take your glasses off." I take them off. She says, "Now put them back on." I do. She says, "Good." I say, "See? I knew where they were." Marriage is basically two people pretending the other one isn't losing it. My wife loses things too. She loses her keys, her phone, her purse, her glasses. Then she asks me, "Frank, have you seen my phone?" I say, "No." "Call it." I call. Her phone rings. She looks around. I look around. The phone is in her hand. I say, "I'm not going to say anything." She says, "Don't." That's love, knowing when to shut up. I've been married 41 years. I've learned that being right is overrated. Peace is better. When you're young, you want to win an argument. When you're 69, you want to finish your coffee. That's maturity. My wife can say, "Do whatever you want," and I know immediately that I'm not doing whatever I want. That sentence is not permission. It's a weather warning. Do whatever you want. Translation: make the wrong choice and enjoy the consequences. I've tested this. Once I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay, what?" "You said do whatever I want." "I did." "So I'm going to watch the game." "Fine." I turned on the television. She walked into the kitchen. Silence. 5 minutes later. "Frank?" "Yes." "Did you remember we're going to dinner?" "No." "You said you'd take me." "I didn't know." "I told you yesterday." I said, "Yesterday I was still working." She stared at me. I said, "Sorry." She said, "It's fine." There it was. Fine. The most dangerous word in marriage. Fine is never fine. Fine is a tiny suitcase packed with consequences. I said, "Where are we going?" She said, "Anywhere." I said, "Okay." She said, "Not that place." "Which place?" "The one you always choose." "Okay." "What do you want?" "Whatever you want." "Don't say whatever." I said, "Why?" "Because you don't mean it." I said, "I mean it." "No, you don't." I said, "Okay." She said, "Stop saying okay." At that moment, I realized something. Marriage is not communication. Marriage is advanced diplomacy without a translator. And after 41 years, I still don't speak the language. I just know when to leave the room. The strangest thing about retirement is money. When you're young, you think, if I make more money, I'll be comfortable. Then you make more money. And somehow you're still looking at the bank account wondering where it went. I remember being 30. I thought $100 was a lot of money. Then I got older. $100 became, that's probably enough for dinner. Then, that's not enough for dinner. Now $100 disappears before I even know what happened. I went to the grocery store with my wife. She said, "We only need a few things." That's another dangerous phrase. A few things. A few things is never a few things. It's a small sentence with a large budget. We walked in. She got milk. Fine. Bread. Fine. Eggs. Fine. Then, this looks good. Into the cart. We need this. Into the cart. This is on sale. Into the cart. I said, "We don't need that." She said, "It was 30% off." I said, "We saved $0 because we spent money." She said, "But it was on sale." That's how shopping works now. You don't ask, "Do I need it?" You ask, "Can I afford to save money on it?" I saw a man at Costco buying a 12-pack of something. I said, "What is that?" He said, "Paper towels." I said, "Why do you need 12?" He said, "It's Costco." I said, "That's not an answer." He looked at me. "You'll understand when you're married." I understood immediately. Costco changes people. You walk in as an individual. You leave as a warehouse manager. You buy mayonnaise in quantities usually reserved for restaurants. You buy enough toilet paper to survive a natural disaster. You buy a television because it was near the entrance. My wife says, "We don't need a new TV." I say, "But look at the price." She says, "We have a TV." I say, "This one is bigger." She says, "Why do we need a bigger one?" I say, "Vision." She says, "Your vision is fine." I say, "Exactly." Imagine how good it could be. She doesn't understand investment. My wife buys pillows. I buy tools. She says I have too many tools. I say, you have 17 pillows. She says, they're decorative. I say, my tools are decorative too. She says, you never use half of them. I say, that's why they're decorative. She said, you bought a $200 drill. I said, it was a good drill. We have 3 drills. Those are old. They work. This one is better. What does it do? I paused. Things. What things? Drill things. She walked away. I knew I'd won. Not the argument, but the opportunity to keep the drill. That's enough. Retirement also taught me something about subscriptions. Everything is a subscription now. Television, music, cloud storage, apps, news, fitness, food delivery. My car wants a subscription. I don't want to subscribe to my own car. I bought the car. It's mine. I don't want the steering wheel saying, premium steering available for $9.99 a month. Imagine stopping at a red light and the car says, your free trial of braking has expired. I would panic. Wait, I need the brakes. Upgrade now. No! Would you like to hear about our family braking plan? Modern companies love family plans. Everything is a family plan. Phone, streaming, music. My family doesn't even want to share. My daughter says, Dad, can I use your account? I say, sure. 5 minutes later, Dad, what's the password? I tell her, that's not working. I say, try again. No. Are you sure? Yes. She comes over, touches my phone, changes something. Suddenly it works. I say, what did you do? Nothing. How? I just fixed it. That's what young people call technology. They touch the screen. Something works. They walk away. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there wondering whether I accidentally signed a mortgage. And then there's online banking. I used to go to the bank. There was a person. You handed them a check. They gave you money. You smiled. Now the bank sends me notifications. Your account has changed. I know. I bought something. Would you like to review this transaction? No, I remember buying it. Was this purchase authorized? Yes, I was there. Would you like to report suspicious activity? No. The suspicious activity is me spending $87 at Costco. That's not fraud, that's retirement. And money has become especially funny since I retired. Before retirement, my wife would say, let's buy it. I'd say, we can afford it. Now she says, let's buy it. I say, do we need it? She says, no. I say, good. She says, but I want it. I say, that's different. She says, why? Because I don't have a salary anymore. She says, you have retirement income. I say, that's not salary. What is it? Money I earned a long time ago. She thinks. Then you already worked for it. Yes. So spend it. I look at her. She looks at me. I say, that's the most dangerous financial advice I've ever heard. She smiles. She's good. She's very good. 41 years of marriage. She knows exactly how to spend my retirement. I used to think technology would be the thing that made me feel old. It isn't. It's my body. My body has become an operating system with too many error messages. When I was 30, I could sleep on a couch. At 69, if I sleep on a couch, I need a chiropractor, a lawyer, and a witness. I wake up in the morning and my body doesn't immediately cooperate. I sit on the edge of the bed. I wait. My knees need a meeting. I move one leg. Crack. The other. Crack. My back. Crack. My shoulder. Crack. My wife says, "What was that?" I say, "Everything." She says, "Are you okay?" Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Do you need a doctor? No. You should get checked. I'm fine. She says, "You always say you're fine." Because I am. You just made 6 noises getting out of bed. That's normal. No, it isn't. I say, "You don't know." She says, "I've known you 41 years." I say, "And you still don't understand my body." She says, "I understand your body better than you do." That's a terrifying sentence from your wife. My knees have become weather apps. I don't check the forecast anymore. I stand up. If my knees hurt, rain. If my back hurts, cold front. If my shoulder hurts, something is coming. If everything hurts, it's Tuesday. I went to my doctor. He said, "Frank, you should exercise." I said, "I do." "How often?" "Every day." "What kind?" "Getting up?" He didn't laugh. Doctors don't appreciate commitment to comedy. He said, "You need cardiovascular exercise." I said, "My heart is working." "You need to raise your heart rate." I said, "My wife does that." He looked at me. My wife looked at me. I said, "I'm kidding." The doctor said, "I know." My wife said, "I don't." That's marriage. You never know which joke is going to become evidence. The doctor also told me to watch my diet. I said, "What should I eat?" "More vegetables." I said, "I eat vegetables." "What kind?" "French fries?" He closed his eyes. I said, "Potatoes are vegetables." He said, "That's not how this works." I said, "Then why are they in the produce section?" He had no answer. My wife was laughing. I said, "I'm making a point." She said, "You're making excuses." There's always a woman in the doctor's office who knows more than the doctor. Usually it's your wife. The doctor says, "Reduce sodium." My wife, "I told him." "Watch your sugar." I told him. "Get more sleep." I told him. "Walk every day." I told him. I look at the doctor. I say, "Do you actually need me here?" He says, "Probably not." My wife says, "He needs to hear it from a professional." I say, "I've heard it from you for 20 years. She says, "And you haven't listened." That's when the doctor looked at me and said, "She has a point." I said, "I hate this office." And now health technology is everywhere. My watch tracks my heart. My phone tracks my steps. My bathroom scale tracks my weight. My refrigerator tracks my cheese. I have more surveillance than a criminal. And all of it is disappointed. My watch says, "You've been inactive." My scale says, "You've gained weight." My refrigerator says, "You've exceeded your recommended sodium." My doctor says, "Exercise more." My wife says, "I told you." Even my toaster probably has an opinion. One morning I made toast. The toaster popped. I said, "Thank you." My wife said, "Who are you talking to?" "The toaster." She looked at me. I said, "I'm being polite." She said, "You've officially retired." I said, "What does that mean?" "You've started talking to appliances." I said, "That's not retirement." She said, "What is it?" I said, "Practice." I love my grandchildren. They're wonderful. They're also the reason I know I am old. They don't ask me questions anymore. They ask me to fix things. "Grandpa, my phone isn't working." "Grandpa, the TV won't connect." "Grandpa, what's my password?"
Grandpa, how do I print this? I don't know. I became a grandfather, not an IT department.
My grandson came over last week. He said, "Grandpa, can you help me?" I said, "Sure." He handed me his phone. I looked at it. I said, "What happened?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "What does it do?" "Nothing." I pressed a button. Nothing. I pressed another. Nothing. I handed it back. He touched the screen. It worked. I said, "What did you do?" "Nothing." I said, "I did that." He said, "No, you didn't." I pressed the button. "You pressed the wrong button." "It worked." "You got lucky." I said, "Luck is a form of technology." He rolled his eyes. That's another thing children have mastered, the eye roll. My children started doing it when they were teenagers. Now my grandchildren do it. I have created a family tradition. My grandson recently showed me AI. He said, "Grandpa, you can ask it anything." I said, "Anything?" "Yes." I said, "Can it tell me where my glasses are?" He said, "No."
I said, "Then it has limitations." He laughed. I asked, "Can it tell me what my wife is thinking?" He said, "No." I said, "Then it's useless." My wife walked in. She said, "I can hear you." I said, "I wasn't talking about you." She said, "You were." I said, "We were discussing artificial intelligence." She said, "I'm not artificial." I said, "I know." She said, "Good," and she walked away. I looked at my grandson. I said, "That's real intelligence." He's fascinated by AI. So am I. Not because I understand it, because I don't. I asked him, "What can AI actually do?" He said, "It can write." Okay. Create images. Okay. Answer questions. Okay. Help you plan things. Okay. Summarize books. Okay. Translate languages. Okay. I said, "Can it take out the trash?" No. I said, "Then your technology has a long way to go." I told him, "When I was young, we didn't have AI." He said, "What did you have?" I said, "Parents." He laughed. I said, "Seriously?"
If you wanted an answer, you asked your father.
What if he didn't know? He told you anyway. That's parenting. My father never said, "I don't know." He said, "Because I said so." That was artificial intelligence, artificial authority, and it worked. We didn't have GPS. We had turn left at the gas station. What if I miss it? You won't. What if I do? Then you'll figure it out. That's how navigation worked. Today, GPS says, "In 500 feet, turn left." I like that. Very precise. Then if you miss the turn, recalculating. I hate that word. It sounds disappointed. Recalculating. I know I missed the turn. You don't have to announce it like I'm a failed student. My wife says, "Just follow the GPS." I say, "I am." You missed the turn. I know. Why didn't you turn? Because there was a truck. The GPS didn't know there was a truck? It doesn't understand traffic. She says, "Then why are you arguing with it?" Because I'm a man. That's the answer.
Men will argue with a machine rather than admit they took the wrong road. My grandson says, "Grandpa, just use Google Maps." I say, "I have a map." He says, "That's paper." Yes. It doesn't update. Neither do I. He laughed. But I like paper maps. They don't track you. They don't ask for your location. They don't say, "You're here." I know I'm here. That's the whole point. I still drive. My wife thinks I should drive less. I think she should drive less. We have agreed to disagree. Driving has changed. When I was young, driving was freedom. You got in the car, turned the key, and went. Today, the car has 17 warning systems. Lane warning, blind spot warning, collision warning, driver attention warning, tire pressure warning. I don't need a car. I need a supervisor. I turn the car on. It says, "Seatbelt." I put it on. Door open. I close it. Low tire pressure. I fix it. Driver attention. I say, "I just started the car." It says, "Please remain alert." I say, "I am alert." My wife says, "Don't yell at the car." I say, "It's yelling at me." Cars today are too sensitive. My first car had one warning. The engine exploded. That was the warning. You knew something was wrong because smoke was coming out. You didn't need a dashboard symbol. You didn't need an app. You didn't need to schedule service. You looked under the hood and said, "Well, that's bad." That was diagnostics. Today you get a tiny orange light. You look at it. You have no idea what it means.
You take a picture, send it to your grandson. He says, "That's your tire pressure." I say, "How do you know?" "It tells you." "Where?" "On the dashboard." "I don't see it." "It's right there." "Which one?" "The symbol." "What symbol?" "The one that looks like a tire." I say, "Why doesn't it just say tire?" He says, "Grandpa." I say, "What?" "Never mind." That's the modern relationship between grandparents and technology. "Grandpa." "Never mind." I also hate parking lots now. When I was young, parking was simple. Find a space, park, get out. Today, every parking space has an angle, lines, sensors, cameras, people backing up, people texting, people driving electric golf carts for no reason. And then there's the person who sits in their car for 10 minutes after parking. Why? What are you doing? You parked. Get out. My wife says, "Maybe they're on the phone." I say, "Then park your phone somewhere else." I'm getting old, I know, but I still believe there are rules. You don't stop in the middle of a parking lot. You don't walk slowly in front of someone's car while staring at your phone. You don't put your cart sideways across the aisle at the grocery store. And if you're pushing a shopping cart while talking on speakerphone, you have officially abandoned civilization. I saw a man doing this. He was blocking the entire aisle. He was talking, "Yeah, man, I'm telling you." I waited. He didn't move. I waited longer. He didn't move. I said, "Excuse me." Nothing. I said, "Excuse me." He looked at me. I said, "Could I get through?" He said, "Oh, sorry." Then he moved 3 inches. I said, "Thank you." He said, "No problem." I thought, that's what you think. Age changes your tolerance. At 25, I would have said nothing. At 45, I would have been annoyed. At 69, I have a speech prepared. I don't deliver it, but I have it. I also don't understand road rage anymore. When you're young, somebody cuts you off. You're furious. You honk, you yell, you make gestures. At 69, somebody cuts me off. I say, "Go ahead." Because I know where they're going. Home, work, the doctor. Eventually, we're all going to the same place. A parking lot. That's the wisdom of age. You stop trying to win traffic. You just want to arrive. And if someone drives too fast, I let them. I don't need to teach them a lesson. My insurance company already has a relationship with them. My wife decided we needed a vacation. She said, "We need to get away." I said, "Absolutely." I imagined a quiet hotel, nice breakfast, pool, maybe a beach, a chair, a book, no responsibilities. She said, "Let's take the whole family." I said, "That's not getting away." She said, "Of course it is." "No." "Yes." "How is taking everyone on vacation getting away?" "We'll be somewhere else." That's technically true, but emotionally, no. We packed. My wife packed for 7 days. I packed for 3. She said, "You need more clothes." I said, "I can wear the same shorts twice." She said, "No." "Why?" "Because." That's the universal answer women give when there is no appeal. We arrived. The children wanted activities. The grandchildren wanted Wi-Fi. My wife wanted restaurants. I wanted a chair. Nobody wanted the same thing. At breakfast, my grandson asked, "What's the Wi-Fi password?" I said, "Eat your eggs." He said, "What's the password?" "Eat your eggs." He looked at me. I said, "You'll survive." He said, "I'm serious." "So am I." My wife gave him the password. I said, "Why?" She said, "Because we're on vacation." I said, "Exactly." Vacation used to mean getting away from technology. Now people bring technology with them. You don't just go on vacation, you document the vacation. Picture, video, selfie, story, post, location, review.
Nobody sees the sunset anymore. They see it through a phone. My wife took a picture of dinner. I said, "Why?" She said, "It's pretty." I said, "We're going to eat it." "I know." "So why photograph it?" "For memories." I said, "I'll remember eating it." She said, "You won't." I said, "I will." She said, "What did we have for dinner Tuesday?" I thought. I said, "Chicken." She said, "It was pasta." I said, "Same family." She laughed. Maybe she's right. Memory changes as you age. You remember the big things. You forget Tuesday. That's why photographs matter. I just don't understand why we need 300 of the same picture. My granddaughter took 20 selfies. I said, "Why 20?" She said, "I need to choose one." I said, "You're in all of them."
I know.
"What's different?" "My face." I said, "It's the same face." She said, "Grandpa." I said, "Okay." There it was again. Grandpa. That's how you know you've said something wrong. The vacation continued. We went sightseeing. My wife wanted to walk. I said, "How far?" She said, "Not far." That's another lie. Not far means far enough that your knees will have opinions. We walked. Then we walked more. Then my wife said, "Look how beautiful." I said, "Yes." She said, "Isn't this worth it?" I said, "Ask me tomorrow." We finally got back to the hotel. I sat down. My wife said, "Want to go out for dinner?" I said, "No." She said, "Why?" "Because I have already been everywhere." She laughed. I said, "I have walked enough for the next fiscal year." That's the problem with vacations after 60. You don't need more activities. You need fewer. A perfect vacation for me now is good coffee, a comfortable chair, a quiet room, a bathroom nearby, no stairs, easy parking, and nobody asking, "What do you want to do next?" That's luxury. I'm 69, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about age. When you're young, you think older people are completely different. Then you become one, and you realize we're the same people, just slower, and with better stories. At 20, I wanted adventure. At 30, I wanted money. At 40, I wanted success. At 50, I wanted peace. At 60, I wanted retirement. At 69, I want everybody to stop moving my stuff. That's my dream. I have a chair. It's my chair. My wife knows it's my chair. My children know it's my chair. My grandchildren know it's my chair. And somehow, everybody uses it. I walk into the living room. Someone is sitting in my chair. I say, "That's my chair." My grandson says, "Grandpa, it's a chair." I say, "No." "What?" "It's my chair." He laughs. I say, "You'll understand when you're 69. That's what age gives you. You stop arguing about things that don't matter. You start caring about things that do. A quiet morning, a good cup of coffee, a phone call from someone you love, a grandchild sitting beside you, your wife laughing at something stupid you said 40 years ago. You start realizing that the life you were rushing through was the life. I spent years thinking, once I retire, I'll enjoy life. Then I retired, and I realized I had already enjoyed a lot of it. I just didn't notice. The family dinners, the road trips, the kids coming home from school, the first house, the first car, the arguments, the vacations that went wrong, the holidays, the birthdays, the stupid little moments. Those were the good parts. Nobody tells you that when you're young. They tell you to work hard, save money, build a career, buy a house, plan for the future. Nobody says, also, pay attention. That's the part I missed. So now I pay attention.
My wife and I sit outside sometimes. We don't talk much.
We don't need to. 41 years together means silence isn't uncomfortable. It's comfortable. She drinks her coffee. I drink mine. Sometimes she says, "Frank?" "Yes." "What are you thinking?" "Nothing." She laughs. "You're always thinking about nothing." I say, "That's retirement." She says, "You're impossible." I say, "You married me." She says, "I know." Then we sit quietly again, and that's enough. But I still have one problem: technology. I tried to accept it. I really did. I bought the smartwatch. I use the smartphone. I have GPS. I have streaming. I even tried AI. I asked AI, "How do I stay healthy at 69?" It gave me 12 recommendations. I read them. I said, "No." My wife asked, "What did it say?" "Exercise." "Good." "Eat vegetables." "Good." "Sleep more." "Good." "Reduce stress." "Good." "Maintain social connections." "Good." "What else?" "Hydration." "Good." "Limit alcohol." "Good." "What's wrong?" "I already know all this." She smiled. I said, "That's why I didn't need AI." She said, "You needed AI because you don't listen to me." I looked at her. She looked at me. I said, "Maybe AI is smarter than I thought." She laughed. Then my watch buzzed. I looked at it. It said, "Stand up." I said, "I am standing." My wife said, "You're sitting." I looked down. I was sitting. I said, "I knew that." She laughed. I stood up. My knees cracked. My back cracked. My shoulder cracked. My wife said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "What was that?" I said, "Retirement." Then the phone buzzed. The refrigerator beeped. The thermostat changed. The television turned on. My watch buzzed again. My wife looked at me. I looked at all the machines. I said, "You know what?" "What?" "I think the house is running my life." She laughed. I said, "No, seriously." The refrigerator beeped. I pointed. "See?" My wife said, "Frank, the refrigerator can't run your life." I said, "Why not?" "Because it's a refrigerator." I said, "That's exactly what it wants us to think." She laughed, and I realized something. Maybe getting older isn't about understanding everything. Maybe it's about knowing what deserves your attention. I don't need to understand every app. I don't need to know every new word. I don't need to understand why my grandson needs 7 passwords. I don't need to know why my refrigerator has Wi-Fi. I don't need to know why my car wants a software update. And I definitely don't need to know why my wife has 17 decorative pillows. Some mysteries should remain mysteries. What matters is that I'm still here, still laughing, still married, still learning, still annoying my family, still trying to remember why I walked into the kitchen, still looking for my glasses, still getting notifications from machines that think they know me, and still eating cheese, although now I hide it. I learned something important. At 69, you don't need to win every argument. You don't need to prove you're right. You don't need to impress anybody. You don't need to pretend you're younger. You just need good people around you. A little humor, a little patience, a comfortable chair, and a wife who still laughs at your jokes, even if she rolls her eyes first. My wife walks into the room. She says, "Frank?" "Yes?" "Are you hungry?" I say, "A little." "What do you want?" I think, "Cheese."
She looks at me. No. I say, why? You've had enough. I say, the refrigerator told you? She smiles. Yes. I look at the refrigerator. It beeps. I point at it. You. My wife laughs. I say, this is ridiculous. She says, Frank, you're 69. I know. You can't eat cheese all night. I can. You shouldn't. I think about it. She's right. I put the cheese back. The refrigerator beeps. I say, don't celebrate. My wife walks away. I sit down. My phone buzzes. I ignore it. My watch buzzes. I ignore it. The television asks, are you still watching? I say, no.
It turns itself off. The lights dim, the thermostat adjusts, the refrigerator goes quiet. For the first time all day, the house is silent. I sit there. I smile. My wife comes back. She says, Frank? Yes? Did you take the trash out? I close my eyes. I say, no. She says, could you? I open my eyes. I look at her. I look at the trash. I look at the refrigerator. I look at my phone. I stand up. My knees crack. My back cracks. My wife says, are you okay? I say, I'm fine. She smiles. You sure? Yes. I grab the trash. I walk toward the garage. The lights come on automatically. I stop. I look at them. I say, show-offs. I open the garage. The door lifts. The smart speaker wakes up. It says, good evening, Frank. I say, don't start. It says, would you like to hear today's weather? No. Would you like to hear your reminders? No. Would you like? No. I walk outside. The door closes behind me, and for a moment, I'm standing in the driveway. It's quiet. No meetings, no boss, no deadlines, no emails, no traffic, no notifications. Just me. 69 years old, retired, still married, still breathing, still laughing, and holding a bag of garbage. I look at it. I say, you know, when I imagined retirement, this wasn't in the brochure. Then I hear the garage door open again. My wife yells, Frank! I turn around. What? You forgot the recycling! I look at the recycling. I look at her. I look at the sky. I say, of course I did. She laughs. I grab it. I walk back inside. The smart lights turn on. The refrigerator beeps. My phone buzzes. My watch buzzes. The thermostat changes. And my wife says, thank you. I smile. And that's when I realize, maybe retirement isn't about finally having nothing to do. Maybe retirement is about finally having time for the people who made all the work worth it, even if they still give you chores, even if your wife still steals your chair, even if your grandchildren still call you when their Wi-Fi stops working, even if your knees sound like bubble wrap, even if your refrigerator judges your cheese. You keep going. You keep laughing. You keep showing up. Because at 69, I've learned something I never understood at 29. The goal was never to make life easier. The goal was to make life worth laughing about. And after 41 years of marriage, I think I've finally got it. My wife walks into the kitchen one more time. Frank? Yes? Can you fix the sink? I look at her. I look at my retirement watch. I look at the refrigerator. I look at the sink. Then I smile. I say, sure. She says, really? I say, yeah. She smiles. I grab my tools. I walk toward the kitchen. Then I stop. I turn around. I say, wait,
She says, "What?" I point at the refrigerator. "Can you ask the smart refrigerator to fix it?" She starts laughing. I laugh. And the refrigerator beeps. I look at it. I say, "Don't laugh."
It beeps again. I say, "I heard you." My wife says, "Frank, you're talking to the refrigerator again." I say, "No." She says, "You are." I look at the refrigerator, then at my wife. I say, "I'm not talking to it." Pause. "I'm negotiating." And that's life at 69. You don't control the house. You negotiate with it. Especially when your wife is in charge. I'm Frank. Good night. And if you're over 40, remember one thing. Never trust the words, "I only have one quick thing for you." Because after 40, there is no such thing as one quick thing. There is only another project. And that's how I know I'm officially retired.